do you make 3 homes vanish into thin air? Well, it's easier than you might think, but it's not a magician holding the wand. It's one of the state's top elected officials.
And did she cross the line in the process? Well, 7 Action News investigator Russ Jones is here now with a story you'll see only here on 7.
The decision Supreme Court Justice Diane Hathaway makes in the courtroom affect everyone in Michigan. This story is about one she made outside the courtroom. Did she get a supreme deal? It's a question she's running from. Behind the stone walls of this gated country club are some of Central Florida's nicest homes. And nestled along the rolling fairways of its 18-hole golf course, you'll find this 4,300 square foot home on beautiful Lake Crescent. Complete with a pool and private boat dock, it was valued last year at almost $750,000. And its owner is crying poor. The owner is Justice Diane Hathaway. Last November, she convinced her bank she didn't have the money to keep making payments on her Michigan home on Lake St. Clair, even though she owned this Florida lakefront home free and clear. In fact, records show in a little over a year and a half, she's owned 4 homes, this one in Florida, and 3 in Grosse Pointe Park. The homes are part of a dizzying property shuffle that experts say raise ethical and legal questions. But Justice Hathaway has been ducking those questions for the last 6 weeks.
She learned the values of toughness, hard work, integrity.
Diane Hathaway was a Wayne County Circuit Court judge before being elected to Michigan's highest court in 2008. She ran as an ethical and accountable judge. But was she ethical in how she convinced her bank to let her out from her mortgage on this Lake St. Clair home? It saved her potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid mortgage payments. Hathaway did it by conducting a short sale. That's when a homeowner convinces the bank to sell their home at a loss rather than go into foreclosure. In this economy, with home values plummeting, lots of people try to do the same thing, but not everyone can. To qualify, a homeowner needs to prove to the bank that they can't keep making their mortgage payments because they've suffered some sort of hardship, like a loss in income. The process can take months, if not years, as Don Marquette learned. When times got tough, his grown children moved in with him and his wife, and then she lost her job. He asked the bank for a short sale. Instead, they kicked the family out of their home.
It was mortifying. I mean, I'm 60 years old. I've worked 28 years, worked all my life, and basically I felt like a bum.
As you'll see, Hathaway's story was different. She hasn't had a shortage of homes to live in. There's home number 1 in Florida, valued at about $740,000, that she and her husband bought in 1999. 2 years later, they bought home number 2 on Lake St. Clair. A few years went by, and Hathaway bought home number 3, this one on Windmill Point in Grosse Pointe Park. But then a strange real estate shuffle began. The homes were moved out of Justice Hathaway's name and into her stepkids. And it all happened just months before the bank gave Hathaway the green light for her short sale. Home number 3 on Windmill Point was moved into her 26-year-old stepson's name. Here in Florida, home number 1 was taken out of Hathaway's name and put into her stepdaughter's. A couple months later, the bank agreed to try a short sale on the Lake St. Clair home. It took months for the bank to reach its decision, and before it did, enter home number 4, this one on Grosse Pointe Park's Balfour Street. Records show it was purchased for cash, placed in Hathaway's other stepdaughter's name, and assessed at $276,000. We don't know if her stepdaughter ever lived in it, and we don't know whose cash was used to buy it, but we do know who's living there now. That's Hathaway watering the plants, and there she is being dropped off. Within a few months of purchasing the 4th home, the bank approved the short sale of Hathaway's waterfront home here on Lake St. Clair. It sold for $840,000, almost half of Hathaway's mortgage. And not long after, the property shuffle started up again. That Florida home that Hathaway put into her stepdaughter's name, it was switched back into the justice's name. The home on Balfour Street in Hathaway's other stepdaughter's name was put into Hathaway's.
It raises questions.
Attorney Howard Young specializes in asset protection and estate planning. He reviewed the timing of the property transfers, but we didn't tell him they were Hathaway's. He says while it's difficult to know why she did what she did, the timing seems unusual.
It just sounds like, listen, I'm going to park these assets in your name for a while. There'll be deeds recorded. You'll own them for all intents and purposes. But our deal is, you know, because you know, you're my child. When the trouble passes, you're going to transfer the property back to me.
For 6 weeks, we tried to talk to Hathaway. We called her and sent her emails asking why she moved properties in and out of her relatives' names and whether she told her bank. Her response, no comment.
Good morning, Your Honor.
So we had to catch up with her as she left her home. She ducked our questions again.
Shouldn't you respond to these? These are important questions, Your Honor.
Without an explanation from Hathaway, it's hard to know why she shuffled her properties in and out of her name, and if it had something to do with her short sale. Howard Young says when his clients have asked about moving assets out of their names to qualify for a short sale, he's told them to be cautious.
Those are typically fraudulent transfers because they are done with the intent to delay, hinder, delay, or defraud creditors. And, you know, even as an attorney, you can very well be considered a co-conspirator in a fraud, and that has significant ethical issues, and the state bar is going to come looking.
Judges are held to a high standard of conduct, and according to the state judicial code, they need to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The bank that handled Hathaway's short sale wouldn't comment on the specifics of this deal, but said they require homeowners to disclose all properties in their name. We've learned that Hathaway did give her bank $10,000 at the short sale's closing. As for Don Marquette, 2 years after his bank kicked him out of his home, it decided to approve his short sale. But the damage had already been done. He and his wife nearly drained their retirement savings just to put a roof over their heads. I'm Ross Jones, 7 Action News.
We have an update tonight on a story that has grabbed the attention of the state's top judge. It involves that Supreme Court Justice Diane Hathaway and some information our investigators uncovered regarding how she handled several pieces of property and the way they were transferred around.
Investigator Ross Jones has learned some new information that's raising even more questions tonight.
In her 2008 run for Supreme Court Justice, Diane Hathaway vowed to be different.
Diane Hathaway. She knows we must restore fairness and honor to the Michigan Supreme Court.
But did she break that promise on her way to unloading this underwater home? She had a short sale. That's when a homeowner convinces the bank to sell their home at a loss rather than go into a foreclosure. It can save them hundreds of thousands of dollars in mortgage payments. But prior to Hathaway's short sale, she shuffled 2 homes out of her name. This Florida home went to her stepdaughter, and this one in Grosse Pointe Park, it went to her stepson. After the bank agreed to the short sale on Hathaway's Lake St. Clair home, that Florida home went back into Hathaway's name. And then there's the home where Hathaway's living now. It was just recently put into her name, but its first owner was Hathaway's stepdaughter. According to records, she bought it for almost $200,000 cash around the same time Hathaway's bank was mulling over her short sale. But that same stepdaughter already has a mortgage for more than $166,000 on this home in Grosse Pointe Woods. So who came up with the cash for the new home? Hathaway won't say, and it's not clear, but the home was put in her name after the short sale.
I taught real estate law.
And whether she crossed a line or not, she should know where it is. As Hathaway told this audience on the 2008 campaign trail, she taught real estate law to other brokers before becoming a judge. And state records show she still has an active real estate broker's license. Hathaway's been a judge for 20 years now, but she knows what it's like to be sued. In 2004, a civil suit filed by Tim and Carrie Moore accused her of fraud. The Moores bought this property in Grosse Pointe Park from Hathaway. They said she never mentioned already selling a piece of it to a neighbor. The Moores only learned of the sale years later when that neighbor started building this fence on the property. Hathaway filed a countersuit blaming the title company, and the parties ultimately settled out of court. The Moores wouldn't talk to us on camera, but said Hathaway cut them a check. Speaking of her paycheck, short sales aren't typically given to people who've netted big raises, but she has. Hathaway went from making about $140,000 as a Wayne County judge in 2008 to more than $164,000 when she was elected to the Supreme Court bench. So could Hathaway's bank have not looked very closely at all of her finances? Yes, says former federal prosecutor Peter Henning, who spent years pursuing bank fraud for the Department of Justice.
Sometimes a bank will be sloppy, or on some individual transactions. They won't dig down too deep simply because they don't have the time.
Without answers from Hathaway, Henning says it's hard to know if she crossed any legal lines. He said anyone providing false financial information to a bank could face potential charges, but
those are very much dependent upon what was said to the bank, what was the level of the bank's understanding, and was any information withheld from the bank.
Hathaway's colleague, Chief Justice Robert Young, urged her to start explaining her property shuffle after we broke the story earlier this month. In a statement, he asked her to respond publicly to what we reported. Instead, she referred reporters to high-profile criminal defense attorney Steve Fishman. But Steve Fishman wasn't talking either, so we had to come here to the state Supreme Court in Lansing to give Hathaway one more opportunity to explain her property shuffle.
Justice Hathaway, may we have a word? The Chief Justice has asked you to explain these transactions. Do you plan to do that?
But there were no answers then either. Instead, Hathaway ducked out a back door, escaping the questions for another day. The FBI, Attorney General's Office, and Judicial Tenure Commission would not confirm whether they're investigating Hathaway's property shuffle. Hathaway's attorney, Steve Fishman, has said publicly that she broke no laws and did nothing wrong. I'm Ross Jones, 7 Action News.
Well, this might sound familiar to you. Tonight, a 7 Action News investigation has sparked a probe by the FBI.
And this time the focus is a sitting Michigan Supreme Court justice. 7 Action News investigator Ross Jones has the latest developments in a story you'll see only on 7.
Good morning, Your Honor.
When we caught up with her in the spring, Justice Diane Hathaway was in no mood to explain the dizzying property shuffle that caught our attention.
Shouldn't you respond to these? These are important questions, Your Honor.
She sped away from us, but she'll have a harder time getting away from these folks. Law enforcement sources tell us that the FBI is investigating Hathaway and the real estate transactions we first exposed. It all involves a short sale that Hathaway received on this Grosse Pointe Park home last year. A short sale allows a homeowner to sell their property at a loss rather than go into a foreclosure. It can save the owners hundreds of thousands of dollars in mortgage payments, but they need to prove a hardship to their bank, like a loss in income. But prior to Hathaway's short sale, she shuffled 2 homes out of her name. A Florida home valued at almost $750,000 went to her stepdaughter, and one in Grosse Pointe Park went to her stepson. After the bank agreed to the short sale on Hathaway's Lake St. Clair home, that Florida house went back into Hathaway's name. And the home where the justice currently lives, it was recently put into her name, but its first owner was Hathaway's stepdaughter. According to records, she bought it for $195,000 cash around the same time Hathaway's bank was mulling over the short sale that they ultimately approved. Hathaway won't say whose cash was used to buy that home.
It raises questions.
Back in May, Bingham Farms lawyer Howard Young reviewed the timing of the property transfers without knowing they were Hathaway's.
Sounds like, listen, I'm going to park these assets in your name for a while. There'll be deeds recorded. You'll own them for all intents and purposes. But our deal is, because you're my child. When the trouble passes, you're going to transfer the property back to me.
It's not clear when the FBI's investigation began, but we do know the grand jury subpoenas have already been issued. Now, just because the feds are investigating doesn't mean any of this will result in charges. We reached out to Hathaway's lawyer Steve Fishman today by phone. He said he was unaware of any federal probe. I'm Ross Jones, 7 Action News.
7 Action News investigator Ross Jones broke the story that led to the feds' investigation. And Ross, this is a serious development.
For sure, Carolyn. In the filing we just obtained, the feds accused Justice Hathaway and her husband of committing fraud in order to get out from $600,000 in mortgage debt. According to a civil complaint, they say she and her husband transferred their waterfront Florida home out of their name and into their stepdaughter's, all in an effort to deceive their bank, which ultimately granted them a short sale. The feds say it was a form of money laundering. So now they're going after that Florida home valued at $750,000. This comes now on the heels of an FBI investigation that was prompted by our 7 Action News investigation earlier this year that raised questions about Hathaway's property shuffle that took place prior to her short sale. Now, interestingly, today Hathaway spent much of her time shooting down rumors that she was going to resign. They were circulated by radio reports citing unnamed sources and said she'd give up her job by the end of the year. Hathaway said that was not true, and she has no plans to resign. Now, of course, we should point out this was before the news broke that the U.S. attorney accused Hathaway of fraud. We did reach out to a spokeswoman for the Supreme Court just a few minutes ago who said she hadn't reviewed the complaint yet. She wanted to look it over before giving us any sort of comment, which she said would come later on tonight. Live in the newsroom, I'm Ross Jones.